Hey, this is Travis Gafford, the double lift expert, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
I, like many of you, love watching community talk shows in esports games, or at least I did. I mean, nowadays as a content creator, I don't always have as much time to watch other people's shows. I'm using a lot of that time myself preparing for my own, or recording my own, or watching esports games. But especially back when I was just a journalist, before I became an on-camera personality, used to love to watch esports talk shows, listen to the big names, the sort of insider guys who are just part of the show, the funny hosts, big name players if they come on, community things, having great topics discussed. But the sad thing is, even though League of Legends is a massive scene, I mean, in terms of how big it is in esports, it's way bigger than any esports game in the era I'm talking about with those talk shows. It has a huge following generally, casually, and esports-wise, and even in terms of hardcore viewing numbers. Yet there are so few talk shows in this scene, but not for want of trying. So even though a lot of what I'm going to say in this show will quite frankly apply to any esports game and any esports talk show, I'm going to make it specific to League of Legends. I'm going to reference League of Legends talk shows to kind of articulate my points. And so that if you've watched some of these esports shows, you'll maybe get an initial sense of what I'm talking about and what I'm referring to. So first of all, when it comes to making esports talk shows, there's an immediate problem that occurs, which is you tend to end up with a dichotomy. You either have people who are making a show and they themselves are quite frankly just casuals. They're just generally interested in League of Legends. They watch a little bit of the esports scene, but you can tell from the way they talk, they don't know the scene in depth. They don't necessarily know a lot about the esports side and the competitive side. They can't really explain macro concepts or the pick ban elements. They just watch and they say, oh, I like this team, I cheer for this team. And they also tend to build their show as being for casuals. Or you tend to go the other way and you have people who are hardcore into the game, and esports side of it is basically all they care about in League of Legends. And therefore, they make the mistake of crafting the show just for the hardcore, not realizing that is such a niche within a niche within a niche. And then even that tiny niche aren't all going to like your show necessarily. So this is one of the areas in which, quite frankly, I'll address the latter first, which is the Twitter analysts who've given it a go, because there was a couple of shows that were made that were absolutely right on the money for, like, these people were classic Twitter analysts. You got to know them, first of all, from their hot takes on Twitter, from their personalities on Twitter, breaking down pick bans on Twitter, giving their thoughts on the games, which doesn't mean, by the way, that I'm saying these guys are not experts. In fact, most of these people I'm about to talk about were experts. I would actually say legitimately, they were Twitter analysts. You can use the derogatory aspect of that. I think there was an element of that. But they also were experts in a way. They were just people who you knew mainly from Twitter, but then they gave talk shows a go. Some of them did content on the side. Some of them appeared on some of my shows. So one of the shows that you may not have heard of, because it had very low viewing numbers, but is a perfect example of Twitter analysts giving a talk show, was a show called Korea Talk. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds vaguely familiar. No, you're thinking of China Talk, a show which also didn't get many viewers, but got a lot more than Korea Talk and was a lot better known. A show that obviously had Kelsey Moser, Froskurin, Razzleplasm, Drexin. You know all those names. Now, Korea Talk had a bunch of names. Quite frankly, you're not going to know if I say the aliases of. It's a waste of time to go ahead and do so. But these were people who literally did watch all the OGN games, all the LCK games. They tried to follow all these matches. The concept for the show clearly was be the Korea version of China Talk, just talk hardcore about what happened in the matches. But quite frankly, the show was way too niche. And on top of that, not only was it super niche, like you had to watch all the Korean games to really be able to follow much of the show, but it was also way too amateurish. These were people without on-camera experience. And so, you know, one person would dominate the mic and then another person would barely talk. And then someone would like interrupt someone to interject something or agree with them in a way that doesn't make sense in an entertainment fashion. Like when you're actually having a conversation with someone privately, yeah, you go, yeah, oh yeah, I thought so. Oh, yeah, that was cool, wasn't it? Yeah. But you don't do that when you're on a show. You have to sort of be a bit silent, wait for your turn. You can interject something every now and then, but you don't react in that same way. So it had a lot of flaws. It was way too hardcore, had the match recap style where it's like, we're literally going to talk about this game between Team A and Team B. Then we're going to talk about this game between Team C and Team D. So the problem is if you didn't watch any of those games, you wouldn't even watch it as like a general recap because they were going so specific into like, and at this moment, this fight happened, or this lane didn't make sense, or what were they thinking in the pick ban there? And so it was way too niche. It never had an audience, quite frankly, and never would have. No audience exists for a show like this. The people watching the fucking show were basically the audience, quite frankly. If you look at the viewing figures, that's accurate. And then they didn't have any sheen, any polish, any entertainment value. In fact, they barely had a host, quite frankly. Just one of them took turns hosting, basically. And it was so amateurish that, again, no one's going to be able to sit through this. No one's going to watch it. And so they didn't have an audience. Then a better version, a more high quality attempt at this was the War Room. If you remember, it had like Jarge and Shakares. So I had a bunch of people I have some respect for and think know about the game and have studied the game. And definitely, you know, obviously have been content creators and have been involved with teams. This was a show, though, which on a higher level, a higher magnitude, suffered from many of the same problems that Korea Talk did. It was way too dry. It was just a bunch of people who were playing the Kelsey Moser, the Monte Cristo type role, but people always forget with Monte Cristo. The guy's a natural entertainer, and he's also trained in things like the arts. He's someone who's been able to break down his personality through some of the fucking Mayan, Guatemalan rituals. So this is a guy with a lot of experience. He wasn't just the expert, although he clearly played that role as well. This was way too dry as a show. Like, I tried watching it a few times. I enjoyed some of the episodes, but again, if it ever got to a point where it wasn't that interesting, it bottomed out very quickly. If they ever got to a point where people like disagreed, but not in an impassioned way, and they were just trying to make points against each other, again, it became way too dry. There's a reason why people will watch a debate between like a fantastic orator and then like someone who might even not even be considered a great thinker, like just some famous pastor or something. But, you know, he can talk, he can capture a crowd, he can make his points. It might be sophistry, but he's got that entertainment value. This show didn't have any of that. And there's a reason why people don't just watch two like super academic scientists debate and go, yeah, that was amazing. Oh, his points about DNA. Oh, that's incredible. Yeah. And when he referenced that paper, of course, that all 10 of us have read, like that's not a mass market media entertainment focus, is it? That kind of a thing. You got to have some of that. Also, this was the type of show that, again, it wasn't that it did match recaps as much, but they went way too deep into things like pick ban analysis between multiple people in a way where even people who watched the game weren't as interested in that part as these guys were. And I felt like that was a problem. Again, it had a bigger niche and it had bigger names, but its niche was still so incredibly small that it could never have succeeded. And so if these guys wanted a certain number, or they hoped they'd break through, or they hoped they'd be what perhaps Summoning Insight wasn't for them, they were very naive, far too innocent in that sense, and a bit misguided, quite frankly. So, as you might have seen by some of the initial examples I've given, a massive problem a lot of these shows have is just pure lack of showmanship. People want to be entertained when they watch and listen to a show. They want some charisma, some banter, because these are aspects which can carry a show in the moments where the substance of the show or the people on the show wouldn't implicitly carry the show. So I consider charisma, banter, these are lubrication for the show. When you get to a point where it's getting a bit dry, or it's a match people haven't seen, or it was a boring match, or it's a topic that there's not necessarily some amazing points for, that's where some humor will get you over the hump, make the leap, carry someone so they can still join in and think, I didn't watch the game, but that's interesting what they're talking about there. That's funny what they're saying. And then they wait and they get to the point that they're interested in. If it's too dry entirely, people just tune out. They'll stop watching, especially on the parts, and you can't control this as an analyst or a guest, that are just inherently not that interesting. Like you're talking about the two worst teams, or a game that was anticipated, but it was shit actually, or a game that played out in a very one-sided manner where there's not a whole lot that like you can break down. These are the points where people tune out. Now, I know myself from doing analysis desks, this is why I developed my formula that the shitter the game is, the less there is to talk about the game, the more I ramp up the banter, the shit talking, the humor element to carry that part of the broadcast. So if you look at the shows which survived, which thrived at any point in time, they are shows full of banter, full of charisma, full of entertainment. So obviously Summoning Insight's a great example, right? Because you didn't just have me doing a lot of that role. That was obviously the role I took on. And to be fair, I was also someone who was there as the villain to provoke discussion. But, you know, it was largely about banter and charisma. But people always underrated the element of that Monty had. He wasn't just there as a brain. He's a guy who had a personality as well and could also go back and forth. And crucially, something Monty could do that so far I have never met a single other person in League of Legends that I've worked with on the show who could do this as well, was he would let me take him out of the topic for a moment to do the banter. He'd back and forth on the banter, and then he could pick right up back again when we were talking about the serious aspect. That's why our intros became legendary. We didn't introduce the guests for like 5 minutes. That wasn't because we were shit at being hosts. That was intentional. It was funny. It was a way to break the ice, get the show going, get the humor going at the beginning. Then we get the guest in, then we launch into the topics and we start talking about real things. But we make sure it's a show first of all, and you've got the rapport between me and him. Then you look at something like Travis's Hotline League, right? Say what you want about Travis. He clearly is someone who can carry a show, who has a voice that's decent enough to listen to. He's someone who can talk with his guests, who knows how to draw stuff out of them. He's maybe not going pure banter. It's not like the most incredible charisma, but there's something there, and that's what's keeping people watching. That's what's keeping the show watching. That's why he's getting interesting discussions at times. You think of Beyond the Rift. It's got Scara and Cutie Pie. These are two of the most charismatic people League of Legends has ever fucking had. And while Cutie Pie isn't exactly that fantastic at articulating his thoughts, he's funny, certainly. And then Scara, I think, is one of the all-time great interview subjects or guests on a show. This guy can just carry a topic forever, making it entertaining, but also going in-depth as you want, giving his own perspective. He has his own philosophy and criteria for judging the game. Absolutely amazing. So it doesn't surprise me that the rapport between those two, having an expert, having an entertainer, obviously that's a great foundation for a show. Sure, on a lot of the shows, they don't go as deep. It doesn't get dry. Sometimes you want it to be a little bit dry. Like you want to sometimes get into the meat of something. That's the case. I mean, to be fair, it does look like often Cutie Pie hasn't watched the fucking games that he's talking about, but fair enough. He's entertaining enough, and I don't think people tune in necessarily for the raw analysis of the games as much as they tune in for the thoughts of these specific people who are very entertaining, fantastic characters to watch. So I can totally see why that has quite a big niche, but a niche in its own right. Before Richard got banned from Reddit, he had First Blood. Now, I actually think Richard was doing a pretty good job carrying that show. Sure, because he didn't necessarily have as deep a reach with all the players. Some of the co-hosts he had, I thought were a little bit ropey. I don't mind any of them, but I like them in, like, you know, for a few episodes or an isolation on one episode. Every episode, I didn't necessarily know he had the best panel overall, but I thought Richard's charisma carried it. He did get a lot of banter going with the others. To be fair, he picked those people because they could banter. So they had that aspect going. My problem is I felt like he didn't have enough of the expert analysis at times from some of the co-hosts. And also, it seemed to have a bit more of an issue with getting guests, which, I mean, to be fair, it's very hard to get guests. Like, people don't realise how many times I had to ask people or wait or schedule a show at a specific ridiculous time to get that big name that you were loving on someone inside. And you're like, hey, now get his teammate. It's like, it's not that easy, mate. It's really not that easy. And if you're ever going to banter, some players just aren't going to come on your show. They might get offended. That does happen as well. I'll also mention in this category the Riot shows. You've got Euphoria, and you've obviously got the one that they do in NA with Jat, etc. I think these are pretty good shows. They've got big casters, obviously, so understandably they have charisma, they have entertainment, they have on-camera appeal. My main beef with those shows is just that they clearly can't be too impromptu or off-script or edgy. I don't mean off-script literally, I mean like metaphorically. But understandably so. It is a Riot-approved show, you know. You're never in any lifetime going to have a summoning insight or oversight, like, officially set up by the show. Like, I know Monty at times has tried to push to get these things more officially recognised. I've always told him, listen, go for it if you want, but I don't see it ever happening. Part of the appeal of our show is we have outsider status. We're independent. We say whatever we want. We talk about the controversial things, right? That ain't going to happen, or it ain't going to fly always if we have some attachment to a bigger body, right? I will say on a minor level, I think poor production value holds a lot of these shows back. I personally can watch anything. I can watch someone with just a webcam box, shitty mic, as long as it's interesting topic, I can get through it. A lot of people can't. If you don't have a proper overlay, that's already going to inhibit you right there. If you fuck up the webcam boxes, it amazes me how many people make talk shows and don't seem to understand the concept of cropping. Crop the boxes and make the heads roughly the same size. No one needs to see all the arms and top the body and back of the bedroom. Just crop a head into a box with the top of the shoulders roughly the same size, and then let people have at the conversation. That's the best. Now, I will say, by the way, this shows how Summoning Insight excelled in certain areas, but not in others, because I didn't even do that part where I just gave that last piece of advice for most of Summoning Insight, but it is something I learned later, and I think it was actually a pretty decent piece of info. Lastly, have decent mics and webcams. Like, webcam isn't necessarily as necessary. The mic's got to be good. You can't have bad sound. If you have bad sound, some people are just going to tune out that episode no matter what, and fair enough. Don't really blame them if that's just something they can't handle. I think poor hosting is one of the biggest things holding it back. When I said before, lack of entertainment, etc., showmanship, a lot of that, quite frankly, I think should come from the host. And I think one of the biggest sins of many of the talk shows in League of Legends has been having a bad host, quite frankly. I mean, I'm not saying I'm the best host. I was started as a rank amateur who'd never hosted shows, and I had to learn as I went. Admittedly, I had been an interviewer for a long time, so I had skills at talking to people, getting info out of people, knowing when to shut up, when to dig for more. So I had some basis, some qualifications to have talent at it. But I think the biggest sin is not having a good host. I hate it when people have a host that either, like I was saying before, the casual versus hardcore dichotomy, he's either just asking super general shit, clearly doesn't know much, and the questions are a bit boneheaded, therefore you never get anywhere. And likewise, those people also sometimes too afraid to spice things up, too afraid to draw interesting info out. Probably the biggest cardinal sin those types of hosts make is when it starts to get a bit spicy, when people start to have a bit of back and forth, it's getting a bit cool, a bit entertaining, they're interrupting, like, well, calm down, lads, no. Like, this is one of the things that, even though I enjoyed coming on some of his shows, it used to infuriate me with Chanman V of like climbing the ladder and unfiltered. When he used to do that, like, you'd be getting into some sick banter. I mean, I realise this might sound like I might not have always wanted that to happen on that show, but then he'd be like, oh, well, let's move on, guys. It's getting too personal. It's like, come on, man. This is literally what everyone wants to see. So likewise, I don't like it when they say, like, let's stay on track with that topic, or, oh, we've got to stay on time, so we've got to move on. That's all the time we've got. Anyone, by the way, who runs a set time limit, I think that's absolute ass. Like, the idea of, like, this is something I was told, by the way, when I made Summoning Insight. Higher up people who I won't reference, who were in bigger companies, worked at bit media companies and had media background, told me, listen, follow these guidelines, make it an hour, make it a hard limit, end after an hour, keep it light, don't go too deep on topics, have a set schedule of topics and schedule out like 10 minutes for this one, 10 minutes for this one. I basically broke every one of those rules, and as a result made a show that was bigger than any other show at the time in all of esports. And quite frankly, for all the reasons that I just outlined, breaking those rules. I made it sometimes 3 hours long if it was great conversation, and therefore you could talk about anything you wanted. We didn't always keep it light. We went down the rabbit hole, and sometimes we went into topics we never planned to discuss. If we were talking about one topic and it had already gone 20 minutes, but there's still loads there and it's fucking amazing and this guy's giving us straight fire, I'm never going to say, well, that's for another episode, let's move on. No, we keep going with that. And so this is an aspect where, again, you can't always follow the conventional rules because you have to understand why those rules exist. I would say guests are a big problem for a lot of shows. Some of the shows I mentioned before never had guests, or they had weak guests, or they had guests that could only come on and talk within very limited parameters. Now, before we get into this, getting guests is fucking hard. People don't realize that. I scheduled almost every guest for Summoning Insight, and it's fucking hard to get them. To get them to agree to do the show. Sometimes they have to go and get approval. Then just scheduling the guys is hard. I mean, for Summoning Insight, we had to schedule quite often over 3 continents. I was in Europe, Monty was in Korea, and oftentimes the guests would be in North America. So that meant that me and Monty had to take the hit almost every single time. Monty always, because he'd have to be waking up at 9 or 10 a.m. no matter what. He'd have to set an alarm. I would have to either stay up late, like start at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. if it's an American guest, or if I got lucky, maybe start at 1 a.m. my time after doing a full day's work. That's why when we did those like mega episodes at like 5 and 6 hours long, I'm not joking, those feel like doing a whole bunch of them in my life have taken fucking years off my life because they've wrecked my sleep. Then I'd have to figure out in terms of when I've scheduled it. Sometimes I have to do a certain day, a certain time, because it's the only time this pro player can do. And that means now I have to stay up all night making sure it renders and gets uploaded in time, because otherwise the matches are going to invalidate a bunch of it and make it out of date. So the amount of times I had to fucking sleep in Korea in my 1-bedroom apartment with a mega noisy laptop fan going, it's like, well, got to get my sleep sometime. I'll just get these 4 hours that I can grind out while that shit's rendering. You had to do it though, because I've always had the philosophy that I will do the things that other people are not willing to if it's what I want to do to succeed. So whether there's other people like, well, we host the show at 9 p.m. local time, and this particular day, 99% of pro players are going to go, sorry, I can't do that. Actually, for whatever reason, might just not want to attend. I can't do that. Whereas if you put the onus on the player, like, listen, I'll schedule around you. You tell me when you're available. You want to do the show? Yeah, right. What day can you do? What time can you do? Right? I'll make that work. Monty, you got to get up this time. I'll get up. We made it work. That's why we had the most straight fire list of guests of all time. Sure, by the end, some of them came on just because of the rep. They liked the show themselves. They liked the topics of the show. They liked some of the people on the show. Sure, but in the early days, it was largely because we were willing to go above and beyond for scheduling, which, by the way, streamers aren't willing to do, casters aren't willing to do, fans aren't willing to do, quite frankly. They always have a set time. That's been one of the themes of my career, quite frankly. Then you got to look at the fact that when you're getting guests, right, you might think to yourself, as I referred to earlier, Twitter analysts should be amazing guests, right? They love talking about it, giving strong opinions. They seem to think they know what's right all the time. Tell you what, Twitter analysts are some of the fucking worst guests you can ever have on these shows. I'll go ahead and say immediately, most of them, despite their how they appear on Twitter, when you get them on a show, they are mad scared of what even the other Twitter analysts think. There's an incredible amount of groupthink going on there and not stepping outside their collective consensus of what them and their friends think. So it's hard to get them to actually battle. Like, you'll have a guy who's giving great opinions on Twitter, get him on the show, he's just agreeing with Monty the whole fucking time. I'm like, what's going on here? Or Kelsey or whoever it might be. Then you got to add in, by the way, 99% of those Twitter analysts who were talking mad buku shit online, talking about what they would say, what they would do in a show, what they think should change. I asked most of those guys, if you can think of a name, I probably asked them for the show. Most of them turned us down. They either, I haven't got a webcam. I'm a bit nervous about being on camera. Maybe next week. And then they'd flake out the show. Like, you wouldn't believe how many of them were fucking mad pussies when it came down to it. Then you got to look at the fact, obviously the people who everyone wants to see on the shows are pro players, right? Especially big name pro players. Now, the good thing about a big name pro player is it's a pretty good draw. People are going to come and watch just because of the name. But you know what? There's also a fairly solid gamble that they're going to be boring or not very talkative or not willing to give a strong opinion or criticise another player. So I actually think that to have big name pros, you got to have hosts who can handle them well, who can either make up for the lack of shit talking that they do or get more out of them, draw more info out of them. I also think, as a general piece of advice, it's really good if you get pros on to have two at a time. Because if you have two, each of them doesn't have to address every topic. They don't have to address what you just said. Sometimes if they don't feel like talking on a topic, they can take a backseat while the other guy talks more. That's a little piece of sort of a little nugget of gold if you're ever hosting one of these shows. You can also balance them out. If you have a quiet pro, but who you want to hear from, you get on a talkative commentator to balance it out. And therefore the pro chooses when to insert himself within that, or when spoken to, he speaks. Now, I would say, outside of those groups, experts like commentators, analysts, journalists who write a lot, these are some of my favourite guests. Now, I used to personally balance it out by having like 2 or 3 big name pros or a caster, and then I'd have on the expert who might be unknown, but I think's amazing, has great analysis. I want to give them a platform, and because people watch the other episodes, they're going to give this one a shot, and they tend to have a wealth of knowledge. This is why you heard of people like Kelsey Moser, Froscorin, Papa Smithy, Clement Chu. Many of these people you probably heard from the first time on Summoning Insight, even though in their own rights, they were at the top of their field, but they didn't have the same exposure level. Now, one of the reasons I'll get to as I'm sort of wrapping up here as to why a lot of shows fail is because you can't listen to the general public for what they want. I mean, there's many great pithy and witty quotes throughout history about the fact that the public don't know what they want. So obviously there's the classic one about Henry Ford where he says, if I ever asked my customers what they'd have wanted, they'd have said faster horses, because obviously they don't know what a car is, do they? Steve Jobs, a big believer in the idea that people don't know what they want until you create it and show them why they want that. That's why he created personal computer, fucking iPhone, iPod, etc. Things that to the same degree didn't exist in that manner before he created them. You don't just go, well, what do you want? And then make a device like that. That's not. So in this case, if you read Reddit, you're going to hear from a vocal minority who will tell you, we want pure analysis, in-depth tactical knowledge. Don't get anyone on the show who's not an expert or a former pro or very good at this game or can go super technically deep. They'll say that because they are a very vocal, tiny minority. And you know what I found actually through my years of experience in many games? That tiny minority are hypocrites. They themselves don't even want that level of depth. What they really want is their opinions or themselves to be on the show or represented, because those are the most critical people of the other experts and other Reddit users and other wannabe hardcore people on Reddit. 99% of what they're doing when they complain about someone's lack of knowledge or this point isn't exactly right is they're just experiencing cognitive dissonance for the fact they don't like the person. They're not getting attention for their knowledge of the game. They think they know more than that person because they know one extra little thing he doesn't. They can nitpick. And that tends to be them expressing their frustration that they're not in that position and someone else is. But they lie and cover it up as like, no, I just want hardcore analysis. I've seen people do hardcore analysis shows. Some of the ones I mentioned before were like that. These motherfuckers weren't watching it. Those shows weren't popular. There is a massive silent majority who just want entertainment, who just want light stuff, who want to be thrilled, who want some funny talk. They want some information about the game, but they don't want you to go too far and make them feel stupid. People want, first and foremost, entertainment. That will carry a show. That will make a show last a long time. Secondly, they want big names. They want people they've heard of, names that they'll draw them in when they hear it. Thirdly, they want the conversation to be good. They want it to flow. They want some fun. They also want some battles at times that feels authentic. Fourthly, and last of all, they want insight and good information. If you can have that, that's the cherry on the top. If you don't, you can make it with all the rest. Generally, even when it comes to insight and information, they prefer narratives about teams. Generally, where a team's out, you think of the players, specific details, over match recaps. Most people either don't watch the games. If they do, they're the hardcore nutters. If they don't, they want some info on what happened and roughly where the team's headed, but they don't want you to break down a whole match they didn't watch or a match that they watched and they don't understand the game incredibly technically deep anyway. And so since they don't have the VOD on screen, they're not really going to be able to follow a whole lot what you're talking about. So what you might say is, right, come on, Thorin, you gave some good advice there. Fair enough, Summoning Insight was a good show at one point in time. But how can you say all of this when your two current shows aren't insanely popular? They aren't necessarily considered like world-beating shows. And you know what? I'd even admit myself, they're not the best shows I've ever done. They're not going to really go head-to-head with Summoning Insight, probably. They're very different products. So I'll explain a little bit about these shows, my motivation for making them, and where I kind of see the shows at. So Narrative Wake is the main show I do. I've done quite a lot of episodes. We've really cranked them out there because Kelsey's a workhorse. Now, for everyone who says, oh, get a different co-host, like, why is she the co-host? Let me just explain something to you very simply here. I created Narrative Wake for one reason only, and that was because I wanted to make a vehicle to showcase Kelsey's talents as an analyst, as a thinker, as someone with a very broad and very deep knowledge and understanding of the scene and the game, but only had one outlet, her journalism. And sometimes I'd read her journalism and I think, oh, fuck, if only I could just sort of pop in here and go, explain that a little bit differently or tie that into something else you've talked about. Or what about this question? What would you say to that? And so this was my chance to do so. And the main motivation for doing it, what spurred me to go, right, it's time to do a show with Kelsey, is she just lost her job at Yahoo. So she was out of a job. At the time, she was scrambling to get freelance work. I didn't know where her career was going to go. So I thought, let's make a show to build some exposure for her, to show how good she is, to show what she can do in this industry. By the way, something I actually did in the past with Froscorin, and a lot of people might not know that. When Froscorin lost her spot as the LPL English commentator when they switched over and didn't give her a job initially, and she was just out on her arse, I came to her, I said, let's do a show. It's going to be called Incoming Aggression. It will be a vehicle just to showcase how much you know about League of Legends. I'll provide the entertainment. I'll banter with you. I'll give the stupid Westerner opinions. You'll give me the insight and we'll showcase that you're the best person. You're the most entertaining, insightful person about League of Legends. And you know what? I actually consider that a career success because we only had to go something like 12 episodes before she was hired again to be an LPL commentator and has gone on leaps and bounds to overcome that initial hurdle of when she said the silly thing about Yellow Star and Leona and become now, I would say, one of the best commentators in esports. Absolutely one of the best in League of Legends. She's even done Worlds Final now. She's overcome all of the obstacles in her way and even overcome all those issues on Reddit where now people actually embrace her and realise her qualities. So I wanted to do something similar for Kelsey. Admittedly, Kelsey not as much of an on-camera personality, but I feel like that's somewhere she can grow. I see myself in her in some ways. I started out as just a hardcore nerd. If you'd put me on camera, it wouldn't have been fucking good. And therefore, I had to learn how to develop that side of myself. So I want to give Kelsey some chance to do that. She's got the breathing room while I kind of try and carry the other side of the show. Now, I will say, it is a show that can be a bit dry at times. I'm working on that. That's something I think we've improved as the show has gone on. I've tried to sort of insert myself a little bit more and sometimes wrestle control and bring in a bit of banter and then give it back for the analysis to Kelsey. I wasn't always as great with the balance on that early on. Early on, I tried to really give the just read the lay of the land, give her full freedom to do what she was going to do, see where she goes, what the cul-de-sacs are, what the areas that make sense are, what her flow is. Now I'm trying to like add in the other elements. I'm trying to be that lubricant, as it were, to make the rest of the show go, the sugar to make the medicine go down, as it were. That's also, by the way, one of the reasons, as I've referenced on the show, as to why I started introducing some like playful banter where I address like mean things people say about her, to change the narrative on them, to embrace the meme, to control the narrative, and to make it seem like we address those, we know what's going on, here's some fun, yeah, haha, Kelsey's a nerd, I'm not watching as many of the games nowadays, and now we're into the show. We've kind of got a bit of the rapport going. I feel like we're gradually getting there. One of the things I'm also trying to do now, if you notice, is work more on who the guest I get is, how I interact with them. And at the moment, because Kelsey is always going to come in and give her thoughts and break down her response to something or analysis, I let her play off the ball a little bit more, as it were. And I'm the point guard feeding the ball to the guest, trying to set him up. And then I let Kelsey come in and I try and make the two of them work together, hopefully, and have a meaningful conversation. Otherwise, I just direct the two of them and I work as kind of a traffic guy. Now, give us time on that one. It hasn't necessarily always worked out at the moment. I think it's a good show. I think generally on average, if you just pick it based on the guest, you're probably going to enjoy it. It's got enough there. And I think as time goes on, it will get better. And it's never going to be Summoning Insight, but we're not trying to be. We're trying to be a vehicle for Kelsey. Then we go on to my other show, League's Next World Champion, which admittedly, I haven't done as many episodes. Emily's been very, very busy. But you know what? Similar story. This was created as a vehicle for Emily Rand. Again, it's not like I could have just picked Loco Doco or someone else or LS. And, like I could have done a show with these guys. Would even probably be a fucking straight fire show, right, in the Summoning Insight vein. But I made this show for similar reasons. When Yahoo was laying everyone off, I wanted to make a show to be a vehicle for Emily Rand's knowledge. And what people didn't know, because they knew her famously from Summoning Insight, she got wrecked by Monty for being a China analyst. People know her journalism, but people don't know this is one of the most foremost LCK experts, Korean League of Legends experts we've ever had. So I wanted to be able to show off that side of her career, where she didn't often get as much of a chance to talk about it. And there wasn't a show anymore covering the minutiae of Korean League of Legends. So we're trying on that show to be niche and hardcore. We're not trying to get a big audience. We're trying to be there for the heads that really do watch LCK every week, all the big games, and we're trying to deliver for them. So I'm trying to be funny on that show. To be fair, one of the few issues that Emily has is there's not as much raw back and forth. She tends to just laugh at a joke. Or, to be fair, she's actually fairly funny herself. She can make her own jokes, but they're a bit more self-contained. So I'm working on that. That's why I'm trying to get guests when I can. I actually think one of the things Emily has going for her is, just like Kelsey has that like encyclopedic knowledge of the game, she already has thought about what she's going to think about. She has her own special skill set. One of the things Emily actually impresses me is she has a very great natural enthusiasm, which I'm trying to give room to flourish, but also tap into a little bit. It's trickier though, because you got to kind of know where she's enthusiastic and passionate and then tap into that and give it space. We're working to get more guests on that one. Again, for that one though, the guests aren't there just for entertainment. Those have to be people who can really go toe to toe with Emily and really sort of like break down all the details and pick through the bones and look for the minutiae of the league and really go deep, because that's a different type of a show, and that was the whole point of that show. Now, the ideal talk show in League of Legends probably hasn't happened. Like, Summoning Insight was pretty good, but even then, towards the end, we didn't have time to watch every region when it was best of three, so we couldn't always go as in depth. I personally think in the post-Summoning Insight era, there are people out there you could do an ideal talk show with. I don't know yet whether I'll be able to. I might think about setting up a third show. I would have to do it around a different theme though, I think. But obviously there's some amazing people out there who I often have on my shows who would make for great co-hosts. But anyway, there's some thoughts on my shows and also why I think a lot of League of Legends talk shows fail or have failed. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.